What if your death wasn't swift, but stretched across days of unbearable agony, your body eaten alive, piece by piece? Throughout history, humans have devised nightmarish ways to punish and execute. But few are as horrifying as Scaphism, an ancient Persian method of torture so brutal it defies belief. Imagine being trapped between boats, force-fed milk and honey, and left exposed as insects devour you alive from the inside out. This wasn't just execution. It was a slow, rotting descent into madness. In this video, we dive into the gruesome mechanics of Scaphism, the terrifying psychology behind it, and whether anyone could possibly survive such a fate. Viewer discretion is advised. This is history at its most disturbing. What is Scaphism? The term Scaphism comes from the Greek word scapha, meaning boat or ship. This is because the punishment involved trapping a victim between two narrow wooden boats or hollowed-out tree trunks, securing them tightly so they could barely move. The victim would be immobilized completely, lying on their back in a small space, almost like a human coffin made of wood. The purpose of this confinement was to leave them exposed to the natural elements and the ravages of insect life, without any chance of relief or escape. At first glance, the punishment might seem strange or even oddly sweet, because it involved milk and honey. But this sweetness masked a calculated, methodical cruelty. The victim was force-fed huge quantities of milk and honey to induce severe diarrhea which saturated their lower body, while their exposed face, hands, and feet were smeared with honey to attract insects. This horrifying combination turned the victim into a living trap and feast for flies, wasps, beetles, and other insects. This horrifying combination turned the victim into a living trap and feast for flies, wasps, beetles, and other insects. These insects would crawl into every orifice, bite, sting, lay eggs, and burrow into the flesh. Open wounds quickly became festering sores, maggots multiplied inside the victim's body, and infection spread rapidly. The victim was helpless to protect themselves from this slow decay. Death was agonizingly slow. Plutarch, the ancient Greek historian, recounts that one victim endured the torture for over 2 weeks before finally succumbing. Over that time, the victim's body rotted alive, turning them into a grotesque spectacle of slow torture that combined starvation, dehydration, insect infestation, and extreme exposure to the elements. Who faced this fate? Scaphism was not a punishment handed out lightly or for minor offenses. This was reserved for the most severe crimes, those seen as existential threats to the Persian Empire's moral, political, and divine order. The Persian kings were not simply rulers. They were regarded as the earthly representatives of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism. The monarch's authority was intertwined with divine will, meaning to challenge or insult the king was tantamount to sacrilege against both human and divine law. The most famous person known to have suffered Scaphism was a Persian soldier named Mithridates. According to Plutarch, Mithridates made the fatal mistake of boasting that he had killed a rival king in battle, a claim that actually belonged to King Artaxerxes II himself. This was not a simple lie or an act of arrogance. In the tightly controlled world of Persian royal politics, it was an unforgivable act of hubris that undermined the sacred image of kingship. The punishment of Scaphism sent a chilling message. Not only was lying about the king's achievements punishable by death, but such a lie could invoke divine wrath manifest in the most gruesome ways. This demonstrates that Scaphism was a tool of control, wielded against treason, espionage, or symbolic offenses that threatened the stability of the empire. It was less about justice in the modern sense and more about power, maintaining order by instilling fear. We can speculate that others who committed acts considered spiritually contaminating to the empire, those accused of betraying the king, fomenting rebellion, or engaging in forbidden sorcery, may have faced this dreadful fate as well. The goal was deterrence through horror, making sure the population understood the absolute consequences of defying imperial or divine authority. The process: sweetness masking horror, The terrifying ingenuity of Scaphism lay in its perverse use of milk and honey, substances we often associate with nourishment, sweetness, and health. But here, these ingredients served as agents of suffering and decay. The victim was stripped naked and tightly confined between two boats, secured so closely they could barely move. Their head, hands, and feet were left exposed and slathered in honey to lure insects. Next came the forced feeding. The victim was made to drink vast amounts of milk and honey, far more than any human stomach could safely digest. The excess milk causes violent diarrhea, which soaked the victim's body and pooled in the lower boat, creating a moist, filthy environment. The honey on the skin acted as irresistible bait for flies, wasps, ants, and beetles, which quickly swarmed in huge numbers. This wasn't simply a matter of insects biting or stinging. They actively fed on the victim's flesh and laid eggs inside wounds and natural orifices. Maggots hatched and multiplied, consuming decaying flesh from the inside out. The victim's body became a writhing ecosystem of pain and infection, the psychological and physical torture. Scaphism's horror extended beyond the physical realm into the deepest psychological torment. Being immobilized between boats, completely helpless while one's own body was ravaged by insects and disease, was a fate few could mentally withstand. Imagine the unbearable agony of buzzing flies landing repeatedly on exposed skin, the sting of wasps tearing through flesh, and the sensation of maggots crawling beneath the skin. This was compounded by sensory overload, the constant drone of insects, the unbearable heat of the sun, the foul stench of one's own bodily fluids, and the pain from open wounds that festered and oozed infection. The victim's mind would soon begin to deteriorate, overwhelmed by pain, fear, and sensory hallucinations brought on by dehydration, fever, and delirium. The mental anguish was a slow, creeping madness. Nightmares would blend with waking horror. Some historians suggest victims might have suffered seizures or psychotic breaks before death. The psychological impact of knowing that escape was impossible, that the pain would only grow worse, and that death was inevitable would break even the strongest spirits. A public spectacle of power scaphism was as much a political tool as a punishment. Victims were often left in marshes or pools near public areas where their suffering became a warning to all. The punishment was a grim spectacle, part execution, part theatrical display of imperial power designed to inspire terror and obedience. The Persian Empire was vast, and maintaining control over diverse peoples often required brutal demonstrations of authority. Scaphism was a macabre message. Defy the king or the gods, and this is your fate. The slow, visible decay of the victim's body was a form of state propaganda, an undeniable proof of the consequences of betrayal. Witnessing such suffering deterred others from committing similar offenses. It symbolized not just the death of a person, but the erasure of their name and legacy, as the body was consumed by insects and rot. Could anyone survive scaphism? Could a person endure and survive such a punishment? The evidence suggests not. The physical devastation caused by constant insect bites, infection, dehydration, and malnutrition would make survival impossible without rescue, an option never offered. Even if the victim escaped the wooden cage, their body would be ravaged, and infection would likely prove fatal. Historical records do not mention any survivors or last-minute reprieves. Scaphism was designed to be absolute and final. Some historians speculate that a person with extraordinary constitution might delay death by a few days, but the mental torment and physical damage would be so severe that surviving in any meaningful sense would be impossible. Fact or propaganda? Our knowledge of Scaphism comes mainly from Plutarch, a Greek historian writing centuries later. Some scholars question whether the punishment was a real, regularly used practice or a form of Greek propaganda intended to depict Persians as barbaric and cruel. Ancient Greeks and Persians were often enemies, and it was common to portray opposing cultures in the worst possible light. Final thoughts. Could you survive scaphism? Scaphism remains one of history's most horrifying punishments, a nightmare of cruelty, decay, and despair. Could you survive it? Probably not. Should anyone ever face it? Absolutely not. It's a chilling reminder of the dark potentials of power and punishment. If you found this video disturbing or thought-provoking, like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest corners. Let us know your thoughts. Are there punishments worse than Scaphism? What does it say about human nature?